This photo is my sister Yvonne. In 1989, on New Year's Day, my brother and I sat down to record my mother's testimony. In the beginning, she was happy to tell us about her family and the good days in Lodge before the war. But when it came to the questions about my sister, she said, I can't talk about my baby. And she would never mention her name. This is the story that I tell in my book. So Josh, if we could go further. The story starts in Poland. Both my parents were Polish Jews. Next, please. This is my mother, Hala Kaplan. You see her at 16 years of age in her Purim costume. I could say a million things about my mother, my adored mother, but for the purposes of this program, I'm going to be very succinct about my mother's family and concentrate more on Susan Mendes and what happened during the war. So next, Josh. This is my mother's family, the Kaplan family. They're a religious family. You see my grandfather in the center, and you see to his right my grandmother. On both sides are my mother's sisters. My mother was the second of 4 girls, and the young man that you see in the picture on the left, the one who's sitting on the left, is her brother, who was in the center of the 4 girls. His name was Leon. They called him Lolek. And sometimes people used his Jewish name, Leib. Next, please. This is my great-grandfather, Abraham Meyer Kaplan. You see him here seated at a Lodge City Council meeting, the year 1925. I don't think I needed to put a red square around his picture because you see his silvery beard and the kippah on his head, and you would know that he is an Orthodox Jewish man. He was the representative of Agudat Israel. And may I just say, when the Geresher Rebbe, who was one of the most important Rebbes in Europe, came to Łódź, he sat next to my great-grandfather in shul. My mother would never forgive me if I didn't say that. Next, please. This is my father, Ignash Krakowiak. You see him here in 1925. I think this was perhaps a passport photo, or I don't know exactly why such a formal photo, but this is how he looked in 1925. Next, please. My father was from a very assimilated family. The Krakowiak family of Warsaw, as you see them here, are at a Passover Seder. How we know that is that there's matzah covered with a cloth at the head of the table. But one rabbi that I spoke to, when I spoke to a religious school, he said, where are the kippot? They're not wearing anything on their heads. I said, well, gee, I guess they were very assimilated. Next, please. This is my father in 1935. You see him here with the automobile, an Opel, that he drove to back to Poland for Passover of 1935. He was about, if he was born in 1902, he was 33 years old, and his mother said to him, Ignacio, it's time to find a bride. Please come home and find a Jewish girl. And that's what he did. Next, please. He was introduced to my mother on a blind date. So he came for Passover in 1935. And after 1 or 2 weeks, he said to my mother, Hala, I love you, and I won't go back to Belgium without you. Well, she was shocked, of course, but she was also 24 years old at the time, which was kind of, you could say, old in those days. And she had been to Belgium before because she studied there for 1 year learning French. So she made a calculation, I guess, and she said, yes, On August the 11th in 1935, they were married. And this here you see is the packing list, which in my father's hand, that was written on the back of a wedding invitation. Thank you. We can go to the next. Just as they were driving through Germany, these laws came into effect, the Nuremberg laws. Beginning today, the Jews are no longer citizens of Germany. Next, please. As my grandmother promised, she came to visit Halle in Brussels. On the left, you see them together in some kind of a park. My mother is standing higher, and Celia, was her name, is standing there with her. On the right, you see Grandma Celia with my mother. My father is the man on the left, and that little boy is Joan Arnay. And the woman sitting on the fender of the car is Joan Arnay. Now, their husband probably, my father's brother Henry, probably took the picture. Why is this important? This is the car that my parents drove to safety. Henry, my father's brother, had read Mein Kampf, and he said, I believe what he says, and I believe he's going to do what he says he wants to do. So he took his family and they went to the World's Fair, the 1939 World's Fair in March, and sold this car to my father. Next, please. This is probably the most unusual photo that I have of all. You see my parents in the front standing at the entrance to the 1936 Winter Olympics, Nazi flags draping the buildings. The big mountain in the back and the Olympic circles, you see them on the bridge over there to the entrance. What they were thinking is very hard to understand if they had read the news at all. People knew what was going on in Germany. Very hard to understand. Next, please. The only thing that might explain a little bit the veil that Hitler put over people of their consciousness was that these signs on the left, where you see that swastika covered in snow, had been all removed. That sign says Jews not wanted, but they had been removed before the Olympics to avoid discomfort, I would imagine, for the Nazis. And there you see my parents skiing. So they went to Seefeld in Austria and traveled the 30 kilometers to view the, they didn't see the Olympics, I don't think, but they went to the venue. Next, please. And this is another headline from the JTA, Jewish Telegraphic Agency, which was kind enough to allow me to use these headlines in my book. All of these things that you see here, you find in my book. Later on, we'll talk about the book more, but it tells us that the Nazis removed the last anti-Jewish signs in preparation for those Olympics. So they had a very good idea that those signs would not make people feel comfortable to come, and people from abroad to come and see those Olympics. Next, please. So that was 1936, 37. In 1938, my sister was born. Her name was Yvonne. Here you see my mother cradling her in her arms. As a little bit of background, in those years when Jewish women went to live abroad, they most often felt comfortable going home when they were ready to give birth. My sister was born in Lodz on the 1st of June in 1938. And as a matter of fact, Olivia Mattis, who was the president of the Sousa Mendes Foundation, her mother was born in Lodz, on the very same street, Aleia Piershegomaya. Next, please. So the baby was born, they went back to Belgium, and life went on for them as usual. The older lady you see in the picture on the bottom is my grandma Julia. She came in August, in the summer of 1939, before the war, because she visited her sons. She had 4 sons abroad. She visited them every summer. And this summer, her son wrote to her, Mamusha, don't come back. Things are very, very dangerous here. So she stayed. Next, please. So on May the 10th in 1940, oh no, excuse me, September 1st in 1939, Germany invades Poland. Next, please. My mother's family, who you saw previously at the spa, Cichocinek Spa, having a good time, were there again on July 27th in 1939. This picture that you see here is dated, and that's why I put the picture to show you on the back, dated the 27th of July in 1939. They were at a spa. I don't know what they were thinking either. Next, please. So on May the 10th, when the bombs started to fall, excuse me, I'm sorry. In September, when Germany invaded Poland, people in Belgium started to panic and they started moving towards the sea. They thought that the Maginot Line would protect them, the Maginot Line that was built during World War I, but they were very nervous and they all went, many thousands went to the seaside as far as they could get away. Next, please. This is a postcard that my mother's sister sent to my mother. First, you see the address. It says Brussels, her address in Brussels, and then crossed out because she's in La Panne. In this postcard, my aunt is asking my mother to send warm clothing to their brother, Leon, who was captured during the invasion in September and was now at Stalag 2A in New Brandenburg in Germany, prisoner of war. Next, please. These are receipts from the Belgian Red Cross that show Leon Lolek, they called him Lolek, but officially he was called Leib. You can see it at the top of the postcard. Received a package from Hala Kaplan, and the date is 28th of February in 1940. My mother's there with my sister sitting on the coast. If you could see this picture close up, you could see the worry on her face. It's in my book, so eventually you'll get to see it. Next, please. After at a certain point, I don't know the date, the Nazis decided it wasn't effective for them to keep these prisoners in Stalag 2A, and they sent them back to Poland. When this is this is the same Leon who you saw 2 years before, nice and shiny and smooth. Now he looks like he's aged 20 years after 2 years as a prisoner of war. And he wrote to my mother when he came home, and he said, Hala, I hope one day I'll be able to tell you what I went through when we're sitting together again. Next, please. And so here my mother on the left, my grandma Julia, my father, and little Ivan, early in the spring of 1940, waiting on the coast. Next, please. And then on May the 10th in 1940, Germany invaded the lowlands, meaning Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg. This started a panic. Next, please. The New York Times reported that refugees in the millions suffer in France, roads from Paris to Bordeaux jammed with wanderers, pitifully in need. Aid from the US suggested. Ill and fatigue left helpless, food supply is scant and demands increase. Now, in my book, I describe the 6-week journey that my mother told me about, but obviously I don't have the time to do that here. Next, please. We have a nice video here. It takes a little time to get started, but Josh, we'll be patient. Uh-oh, is it coming? Click it again. Oh,
I think it's working. It just takes a couple
yeah,
seconds.
I'm the one who's impatient. Okay, now you click again. It's in French, and I'm showing it to you for the visual because the sound is always too low.
L'irruption soudaine des hordes hitlériennes leur a laissé à peine le temps de réunir les objets les plus précieux et les plus utiles. Ils fuient devant l'ennemi qui ne respecte ni la vieillesse ni l'enfance.
Okay, thank you, Josh. Next, please. Now, besides the millions of people on the road, they said close to 9 million perhaps on the road, the Nazis were strafing the highways, okay? So people had to plunge into the ravines on the side of the road, cover them, so parents jumping on their children to protect them. It was dangerous. There was no food. And my mother's trip took 6 weeks at least. Now, Antonio Salazar was the Prime Minister of Portugal. Next, please. He was officially neutral, but had Nazi sympathies or Nazi sympathies, but he was officially neutral. And when the Nazis invaded Poland, he declared, he sent all his consulates this Circular 14, which prohibited consulars to give visas to Portugal. Who was excluded? All visa applicants needed prior approval from Lisbon, okay? Who was excluded? Foreigners of indefinite or contested nationality, the stateless, Russians, holders of Nansen passports, Jews expelled from their countries. Let's say everybody excluded without prior approval. Even with, wouldn't get prior approval. Next, please. So this is a graphic drawing of what it was like in Bordeaux. I don't know if it's very clear to you, but there's thousands of people swarming to cross this bridge, trucks, buses, and private cars and people. Next, please. So in this situation where thousands or hundreds of thousands of people were in Bordeaux, they were bottlenecked there because their consul general, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, who later became known as the Angel of Bordeaux, he was prohibited from issuing visas to these refugees. I'd like to tell you a little something about who this man was before we go further. Next, please. Aristides de Sousa Mendes, that's him there in the center, and on the left is his wife, Angelina. He was the son of a prosperous family. His father was a judge in the High Court. Angelina also came from a noble family, and they had a beautiful chateau, large building, house in a place called Cabanas de Viriato, which was in the center of Portugal. Their home was called the Casa do Passal. We'll talk about it later. In any case, here you see the first 10 of their 14 children. Sousa Mendes was a devout Catholic man. He was also a man who loved music. Each one of these each one of these children played an instrument. It was a happy, happy household until the war, until all of these refugees started descending on Bordeaux. He saw them in the streets. He didn't know what to do about them. People were banging on his door. They wanted visas, but he was prohibited from giving them visas. And then the story goes like this, and we can go to the next slide. Josh, please. The story goes like this, and no one can tell you the exact truth, knows the exact truth, except that Rabbi Chaim Kruger's testimony can be found on the website of the Sousa Mendes Foundation. So if you want to read everything that he wrote, you're welcome to go there, SousaMendesFoundation.org, remember. But I'll give you a synopsis. They say that Rabbi Kruger met Sousa Mendes, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, in the crowded streets of Bordeaux, perhaps outside of the synagogue or in the big piazza near his consulate. In any case, for some reason, they spoke to each other, and and Sousa Mendes invited the rabbi to his home, where they spoke about the Bible, the Old Testament and the New Testament, and they became friends. And Sousa Mendes said, Rabbi Kruger, I'm going to write to Lisbon for special visas for your family. And he wrote. And on June the 13th, the answer came back, no visas for the Kruger family. And Sousa Mendes decided, Rabbi, I'm going to give you visas anyway. And the rabbi said to Sousa Mendes, I cannot accept your kindness unless you let all my people go, which sounds very biblical, right? And this sent Sousa Mendes into 3 days and 3 nights of isolation, where he was kind of salt and pepper gray like me before. He came out totally white. The only person he spoke to was his wife. He hardly ate. When he came out, he said, he's quoted as saying, I would rather stand with God against man, meaning Salazar, than with man against God. And I will give visas to all who ask. This started a flurry of activity in the consulate, where they set up a line of people working. Even Sousa Mendes' son, 1 or 2 of them, were stamping visas. And the rabbi went down and collected the passports of refugees and brought them up, and then they stamped visas. And even in the end, it is said that Sousa Mendes told his son, sign my name, which every schoolboy or child would like to sign their parents' name, but this was official. He told them, sign my name. So you see different kinds of signatures on the passports. And Olivia Mattis, president of the foundation, has at least 10 passports, and you can see the deterioration of the signatures as the time went on. Well, next, please. We cannot tell you exactly how many visas how many passports were stamped and how many visas were given. But what we do know is that many times, very often, one name was on a passport, and 3 or 4 children went under that name. So we have lists, not complete, but some people quote 30,000. Olivia prefers to be modest and say thousands. Next, please. This is a copy of a passport. So here on the right side, you see the stamp of the Republic of Portugal, and you see the name that saved thousands and thousands of lives. On the left, you see another a stamp, which was probably 2 stamps actually, right? Sortie, one says sortie, that's the French exit visa, and the round one towards the bottom is probably the Spanish transit visa. Because when you had this visa to Portugal, you had to pass through Spain in 3 days. They gave you 3 days to pass through. Next, please. Now I show you this picture of a composite of many visa recipients, of course, not at all the number, but in the middle at the bottom, second from the bottom, you see Salvador Dali. And many, many famous people were saved. The royal family of Luxembourg, some Rothschilds were saved. Many filmmakers, artists, people were saved. And the man that I have circled in red, or in a square in red, is my mother's friend. So, next. Jews press efforts to escape from France. 760 more reach Portugal. Another article in the JTA that says many Jews were sent to Figueira de Foz, one of a seaside villa in Portugal, where my mother spent her time in Portugal. Next, please. This is the gateway to Portugal, the official gateway to Portugal, through this train station where the Portuguese secret police would take your passport and your visa and tell you where you could go, which town was available for you. Now, my mother tells me, and I tell the story in the book, of what it was like to go through Spain, and then it was raining and cloudy and dark. There was poverty all around because they had just come out of a brutal civil war. And then she got to Portugal and the sky opened up, but not only the sky because it stopped raining, but Portuguese people from the town of Vilar Formoso came to the station with trays of food and asked, "Are you hungry? Do you need a place to take a shower? Come, have a night in my house and have a rest." My mother couldn't believe it. Next, please. Well, this is a photo of my family at the Café Europa. You see my father standing on the right and my mother sitting below him, another lady who I don't know, and then my sister Yvonne sitting in my Aunt Zosha's lap. I don't know the other two ladies to the left of her, but the gentleman sitting there was Leo Eisenbrook. Now he changed his name to Elson, another one of my mother's friends. Every single one of my mother's friends in the United States in the beginning were refugees from Europe who received visas from Aristides de Sousa Mendes. Thank you. Next. Many refugees got to Portugal and were lucky enough to just leave. They had visas to go to the US, to South America, somewhere forward, but my parents had nothing, and then they remained in Figueira de Foz for 18 months. While she was there, she received letters and postcards from her family. Now they were all enclosed in the Warsaw Ghetto, and they wrote, "Hala, can you send us some coffee? Not that horrible kind that's not real coffee, but real coffee." They were asking. They had I don't know what you call it, provisions that they wanted, or maybe some clothing because the little boy Marcish is growing and he's growing out of his clothes. And my mother sent them things, and until a certain date. But here you see, I want to tell you about what it was like for her in Figueira. You see my mother and my father with my little sister Yvonne dressed in a special holiday costume called a minot, and I'm sure they'll pronounce it correctly, costume. It was supposed to be used for festas, for feasts. And I imagine that this day is Mardi Gras in 1941, because by 42, Mardi Gras 42, they weren't there anymore. And when I was going to make my first trip to Portugal on the journey on the road to freedom, Sousa Mendes Foundation members helped me to locate the grandchildren of the man who became my mother and father's best friend, a Portuguese man, a kind man, a compassionate man named Alberto Malafaia. This is his daughter's dress that he gave to them to wear for the day because she had outgrown it. Next, please. This is the day that my mother is leaving Figueira. And I show you the back of the photo because it's dated the 23rd of January, 1942 in Caldas de Rainha. I don't know how she ever got this photo because they didn't have 1 hour photo then. So how did she get it? How was it developed and sent to her? It's unimaginable. I don't know. But they were on their way to Lisbon to catch the SS Serpa Pinto, which would take them to Paradise. They were going off to Paradise, Jamaica, British West Indies, where they were told my father would be allowed to vote, allowed to work. In any case, I would like to just point out the man in the shadow in the back. Josh, do you want to point him out? No, not the other one on the left in the shadow. That is Mr. Alberto Malafaia. So imagine, he accompanied them all the way from Figueira to the port in Lisbon to catch their boat. And now they're off to Paradise. Next, please. These are the routes that people would take by ship to leave Lisbon and leave Nazi-occupied Europe. Next. Well, my parents were sent to Jamaica, British West Indies, but it wasn't a paradise. I don't know how well you can see this picture, but it is a evacuee camp encircled in barbed wire, where they had a curfew of 10 p.m. Why they had the barbed wire, the excuse that was given was to protect them from the people around. I don't know. And instead of being allowed to work, they were not allowed to work, except that because my father was a very active sportsman and they needed a gymnastic teacher at the Jamaica College, which is a high school, because their gymnastic teacher was called to war. He was British and called to war. So my father got the job of gymnastic teacher at Jamaica College. Well, this was really great because my mother said, "Oh, Ignacio, you're going to learn English." The only problem was everybody wanted to speak French with him, so he learned very little English. He bought an old rusty bicycle to go from the camp to the town where the college was located. And in the afternoons, he made a small little chair for my sister to sit on the back. And something happened. There was an accident. Next, please. There was an accident. My mother never told me what happened. She never spoke my sister's name. And until 1997, I never saw a picture of my sister. But in 1997, my mother gave me this album. You see this album? And inside, can we see this, Josh? Do you see this? Yvonne, June the 1st, 1938, June the 4th, 1942. There was an accident, and I know about it only from 3 young children who were interned in the camp, in Gibraltar camp, and in my book, I tell a story that they told me, and I'd like to just read for you now the cards, the printed text here because it's too small, but it's important. So it says, from the Polish group in Jamaica, Camp 2, on the 4th of June in 1942, deceased, number 82, Ivan Krakowiak, 4 years. Hut 62, room 21. And then the lower card. Kingston, 5th of June, 1942. Mr. Glashweib, he was the coordinator of the Polish group, to the Heisem in New York, about members of the group. Dear sirs, yesterday we had a rather bad day, and decidedly nothing will be spared to us, as we had the first death among us, a little girl of 4. Enclosed 2 slips for the files, Duplo for the joint. And this is the gravestone that they put up for my sister. And on it, it says, Ici repose Ivan Krakowiak, fille adorée of Hala and Ignaz Krakowiak. That means the adored daughter. Next, please. After 18 months in the camp, my parents, it was October in 1943, they finally arrived in New York. And that was October of 43. In May of 1945, the war was over. And while I was in my mother's womb, she wrote this letter to her grandfather in Lodz, Poland, on Południowa 3. That was the name of the street. And I can please read that to you as well. And she writes, on May the 5th, 1945, dearest Grandpa, the wartime turmoil has pulled us to New York. We lived through some very hard times, but I now know they were nothing in comparison to yours. Is it possible that you are all healthy? I would be happy if I would receive a small sign of life from you. Write, and I will send you packages, everything that I possibly can. Sending you heartfelt kisses, Hala. And you see, it says, return to sender. Next, please. So here we are, that's me on the left at about 1 year old, and there are my parents in the center, my mother in the light coat, and my father holding me, and their friends who were smart enough to leave Europe before 1939. Next, please. This is my family tree. You see the Krakowiak family on the left, and the blue square, that's my mother. I pulled her out of the Kaplan family and brought her here to the Krakowiak family because, as you see encircled in black, none of them survived. Next, please. Okay, I've talked a lot about my family, and now I want to talk about Sousa Mendes. Sousa Mendes saved more lives than Schindler, so why isn't he a household name too? Next, please. The reason is that Antonio Salazar, the Prime Minister of Portugal, buried him in history. He brought Sousa Mendes back from Bordeaux very soon after the action that saved thousands and put him on trial. It was a sham trial. He didn't even have a chance, I believe, to defend himself. And he was stripped of his diplomatic title. He was stripped of his law degree. He had no way to make a living, and he had 14 or 13 children. A couple of them had died, unfortunately, before that. And a young boy gives a testimony that says, and if you see the picture on the right, that's the soup kitchen, the Jewish soup kitchen in Lisbon. A young boy who was there at that soup kitchen gives a testimony. When Sousa Mendes' family came into the soup kitchen, somebody said, "Excuse me, sir, this kitchen is for refugees." And Sousa Mendes said, "We are all refugees." And so what happened was, he went, his family was destitute. He sent his children all the places where they were born. Fortunately, there were people who would receive them, some in California, some in Montreal, I don't know if he was a consular in Montreal, but he had a connection to a priest in Montreal who took children. And all over, wherever he had been, he tried to send his children so that they would be able to have an education. The entire family was shunned. Their own cousins didn't speak to them because of what Salazar did to erase him from history. Next. It was the Jewish people at Yad Vashem who took the testimony of Rabbi Kruger and made Sousa Mendes righteous among the nations. That was in 1966. In 1967, you see them here. These are Sousa Mendes' children, 3 or 4, there are 4 of them, I think. One is a husband, and grandchildren. And they're standing there with a medal of the righteous among the nations that they received at the Israeli consulate. Only in something like 1987, when Salazar was gone, did they have the and they had the Carnation Revolution. Sousa Mendes' name was reconstituted and brought back to the attention of the Portuguese people. Next, please. What happened to his home, his beautiful home that I described before, the Casa do Passal, and this is a picture in 2010, was that while he was destitute, he took window frames off the windows and burnt doors in the fireplace for heat. The rest of the place was, after his death in 1954, I don't know, deteriorated to something abominable. But, next, please. Along came 2 very important organizations, the Fundación de Sousa, Aristides de Sousa Mendes, which is the Portuguese foundation that remembers his name, and then the Sousa Mendes Foundation in the United States. And here you see one group in 2016 of people in front of the consulate, I think it's Bordeaux, the Bordeaux consulate, on the journey on the road to freedom. Here you see visa recipients, children of visa recipients, and other interested parties, also grandchildren of Sousa Mendes, who also, oh, here he is, Gerald, up in the left. Can you point him out here? Josh, oh, Gerald Mendes. He was born in Montreal. And maybe another Mendes, I don't know. But when we get closer to Portugal, we meet more of the Mendes family. Next, please. And here you see the Casa do Passal in 2016. The European Union has made it a historical landmark, and they've given money for the restoration of the museum, which is now in the process. And we're hoping one day, very soon, that it'll be opened as a museum in honor of Aristides de Sousa Mendes and his heroic acts. Next, please. In the meantime, and not any less, a beautiful museum has been created in the Vilar Formoso, the place where we entered, where they entered Portugal. And the lady here on the left, in the picture on the left, can you see, Josh, the lady, yes, that beautiful lady, Luisa Marques, Pacheco Marques, and left up to her is the president of Portugal, Marcelo, no, not him, the next one in the center, yeah, Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. And so he's there, and on the right, the picture on the right, I'm there, and I'm reading to him from my book. He's already had my book from 2013, but I gave him a second copy. And when I started reading the things that I read to you about the little girl in Hut 62, I started reading and he started reading and I froze and he continued. It was just fabulous for me anyway. Next, please. This is the part of the museum where they speak about the refugees in Figueira de Foz. And on the left, you see Alberto Malafaia. You see my mother in the center, my father on the right, and that Mercedes that brought them to safety. And the little doll enclosed in plexiglass is a doll that I believe was given to my sister by Mr. Malafaia when she was leaving Portugal. Oh, can I just say something that I forgot? Do you see this? Oops, which way do we go? This way? This is a silver compact. And this is it says HR, and it was given to my mother on the day of her anniversary in and it says 1941. You can't see it here, but my father did not have money to give her presents, and but Mr. Malafaia gave my sister presents. He gave her a silver bangle, and it had, I lost it. I want to kick myself, but I lost it. In any case, next, please. I would love to show you a little video clip of my mother on the day in 1989 when we did the video recording that forms the basis for my whole book. But it's so bad that it comes from a VCR, and the sound is so terrible that I can't. But what she says here is, she was talking about our neighbor. What was her name? Oh, forgive me, I forgot her name. It's Roseanne or Suzanne, I forgot her name. She said, our neighbor says that I was brave. When I told her the story, I was brave. She said, but I didn't think I was brave. My mother was so modest. She said, I didn't think I was brave. And then she said, but you know who was brave? Daddy was brave, because when the bombs were falling on the road, and the cars were stopped because we couldn't move, and my uncle got out of the car, he said, my father, your father said to Hippek, his brother, you can go back, but they're not going to get me. And he kept driving and driving and driving, and they reached Bordeaux and then Portugal. Next, please. We have a film coming up for the Sousa Mendes Foundation. They have, I told you about the Sunday programs, I think, and on November 29th, I am going to be interviewing the director and of the creator of the film With God Against Man, which quotes Sousa Mendes' probably most famous words, and it's the story of the 2013 Journey on the Road to Freedom. So if you want to register, I'll be happy to see you again. And that says events, and it's all together, /events. It should be all underlined. And next, please. We have copies. We have printed copies of my book. This is my book. It's 100 photos and documents in full color, and it's geared to students from 6th grade to 12th grade. It's used in Portugal to teach the students, and you can have a signed and inscribed copy, signed by me and inscribed by me, to anybody you would like. Just go to the SousaMendesFoundation.org/store. But if you just want to read the story on your iPad or on your computer, write to SousaMendes.org, and I will send you the link to the flipbook, the ebook, so you don't have to pay a penny for that. And I want to thank you very much for your patience and listening.